In this video, we're going to try and revise how to use the passive voice in English, and especially why it is so important in English, because in English you use passive voices much more frequently than you do in Spanish. So we're going to try and see all the different types of sentences and how you can incorporate them in your speaking or your writing. There are two main reasons why you should use the passive voice in English, or why English tends to use it. Number one, because it allows you to concentrate on important information, and we will see some examples about that. So, with the passive voice, the important information comes first, at the very beginning of a sentence. The other reason why you may want to use a passive sentence is that it allows you to sound somehow more impersonal. And again, we will see some examples about that. So, as you will probably remember, the main structure you may have, and this is something very similar to Spanish, is when you have an active sentence with the subject, then the verb, and then just one object. And then the transformation will be exactly the same as in Spanish. You may find an active sentence saying something like, one of the most famous forgers in the world, that would be the subject, made, verb, this copy. Okay, so this is all subject, verb, and object. Probably the most important thing in this particular sentence is not the forger, but probably this copy that we have here, which is a very good copy, for example. So if we want to emphasize this, not the forger, we need to start the sentence talking about this, because in English, the first element in the sentence receives a lot of attention, is the focus of information. So we're going to start with this. This copy. Now we turn this verb into the passive. Remember to make a verb passive. If this is in the past, now we use the verb to be in the past, this copy was, and then this verb again in the participle, past participle, was made. In this particular case, this is relevant information, so I would include it. So the subject becomes the agent with preposition by. By one of the most important forgers in the world. All this. Okay? And saying that, this copy is the focus of information because it comes at the beginning. Very similar sentence here. You've got the subject, the verb, and then the object, and then some other information. So what we need to do now, the object will become the subject, I. This verb's in the past, so we need to use the past of the verb to be I was, and then this verb in the past participle, accused, and then the rest of information of stealing the money. In this particular case, would I include by somebody? I wouldn't, because this isn't relevant information. We know nothing about this, so I would omit it. Another example, police in New York, that's the subject, have arrested, verb, 3 terror suspects, that's the object. So, now the object becomes the subject, 3 terror suspects. The verb needs to be different. If we have the present perfect here, so we need to use the present perfect of the verb to be. Have been, and then the participle of this verb, arrested. You could leave it at that, or you could say, have been arrested by police in New York. It depends on the context and how relevant you think that information might be. Another example, you know that many houses in the UK have these railings, and sometimes people attach bicycles to them. So it's very easy to find signs warning people against railing their bikes against those railings. So they could say things like this: we will remove bicycles if you lock them to these railings. However, the important element here is probably bicycles. What's going to happen to bicycles? So probably you could say things like bicycles, now this verb in the passive, because it's will and then an infinitive, so we use will, then the infinitive of the verb to be, will be, and then the participle of this verb removed. And then this sentence here, you can make it into a passive as well, because you have subject, verb, and the object. So I would probably, I would stress bicycles again. I would make this the focus of information as well. So bicycles will be removed if they this verb in the passive, if they are locked to these railings. So you will probably find a sign like this: bicycles will be removed if, you don't say they are, you omit that, if they are locked to these railings. Again, another sign you're likely to find, for example, in a park. Instead of saying you must keep all dogs on a leash, this is the important thing. All dogs, this verb in the passive. When you have a modal verb, you use the modal verb must, then the infinitive be, and then this verb in the participle must be kept, and then the rest. On a leash. Something like that, for example. Okay, another possibility, in the active sentence, you may have a subject, a verb, then two objects. Maybe the order might be different, but you have a direct object, then an indirect object. Let's see some examples. You might have a sentence like, the policeman gave me, it's the indirect object, a fine, it's the direct object. In this particular case, you have two possibilities. You could again take for example, a fine, this verb in the past, was given, and then because you changed the order, if you want to incorporate this, you need to include preposition to. To me, by a policeman, not really interested. However, the most likely version of it is that when you have a sentence like this, the most important thing is that I had a problem. I received something positive or something negative. So start with the indirect object. That's much more frequent. So you would say things like, I was given, and then the object, a fine. If you want to include by a policeman, not really necessary. I think you can understand that from the context. But you start with the direct object. I was given a fine. A similar example here. You have the subject, they, shouldn't tell, that's a verb, the indirect object and the direct object. So probably you would start with this as the new subject for your passive voice, because this is what you want to stress. He shouldn't be, because it's a modal verb, and then the participle of this verb, he shouldn't be told the truth. Okay, finally, there are some expressions that do not exist in Spanish, but they are essential in English, especially if you think of newspapers, mass media. I'm referring to when people in general, or experts, or a group of people say, believe, claim, expect, think, things like that. Let us see some examples. This is a sentence that makes perfect sense, but is highly unlikely to be found anywhere in newspaper, for example. This is the active version. People believe, and then you have a new clause. People believe that, blah, 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 whatever. Okay, you have two possibilities here. The first one is perhaps easier to make for Spanish speakers of English. It could be something like, you start with it. This is an empty it means nothing. It just starts the sentence. It, then you use this verb in the passive. It is believed. And the rest remains absolutely the same. So, it is believed that the Prime Minister is in favour of Brexit. However, the most frequent option would be something completely different. If you have a look at this sentence, probably the most important element here that can be at the beginning of a sentence, or the focus of information, would probably be the Prime Minister. So we're going to start with that. So we start the Prime Minister. Now this verb in the passive according to the new subject. It's in the present, so is believed. And now what we need to do is to take the second verb in the whole sentence, and then this is going to be used not in the present as it is now, but as an infinitive. Is believed to be, and then the rest of a sentence. In favour of Brexit. The Prime Minister is believed to be in favour of Brexit. That sounds perfectly okay, natural, and the normal way, or the normal thing you might find on a newspaper, for example. There are all sorts of legends about ghosts, haunting, for example, typical places in London. So we have a sentence, an active sentence, saying some people think. Who some people? We don't really know. We don't really care. So the important thing here again is the second part of a sentence. The ghost of this particular actor, and this ghost is doing something. That's the focus of information. So you could say something like, it is thought that the ghost of actor William Terrace haunts Covent Garden Station. Or, much better, if the subject of the second part of the sentence is the focus of information, we start with that. So, the ghost of actor William Terrace. This is the main verb, and this is going to be in the passive. Is thought. And then this verb here in the infinitive. To haunt Covent Garden Station. As you can see, both in the previous example and this one, both verbs, the main verb and the second verb, are in the same tense. Both actions are happening at the same time. That's why you make this verb in the passive in whatever tense you need, and then the to infinitive. And this is something you could read some time ago. It's a sign you could read on the London Underground. The ghost of actor William Terriss is thought to haunt Covent Garden Station. However, there are times when people say, think, or believe now, and it's about things that happened before that. So, for example, people say now that Robin Hood stole money from the rich to give it to the poor. So, because this action, the second action, the action that is thought, believed, etc., happened first, and now people say, or now people believe, we need to make some changes. Again, you could say, it is said that Robin Hood stole money from the rich to give it to the poor. Or you can use the most interesting one, the one that's going to attract people's attention, if you start with the subject of a second sentence, which is the focus of information and what's going to attract people's attention. Robin Hood, this verb in the present passive, is said. And now, because this verb's in the past, what we're going to use now is the infinitive, but not the normal infinitive, but the perfect infinitive. Robin Hood is said to have stolen money from the rich, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so this verb remains in the same tense, but in the passive, of course. And this verb, to indicate that this action happened before this one, needs to be in the perfect infinitive. A very similar thing happens here. People know now that Henry VIII had 6 wives. So, this is the important thing, what's going to get people's attention. Henry VIII is known. And now, this verb, because it's in the past, and this happened before the main verb, in the perfect infinitive. To have had 6 wives. And finally, another example of passive sentence that may mean something a bit different is with the verb suppose. That active sentence is not really, doesn't really sound very natural, but I need to make the passive transformation, which is absolutely normal. The idea, imagine I'm talking to my partner or to a member of my family or a friend or whatever, and they should have done something that they didn't do. So when I face them and say, you didn't do this, and I'm sort of complaining or letting them know that I'm a bit angry, or maybe just reminding them that they should have done something they haven't done. So instead of saying this, I suppose that you were going to top up the card to spend money so that I can use this card on buses or trams or underground or whatever. So instead of saying, I suppose that you were going to top up the card, you could say, this is a perfectly ordinary sentence. You, this verb in the past and the passive, you were supposed to top up the card. And that's a beautiful sentence in English, very normal. You were supposed to top up the card, which means you should have topped up the card. You could say things like, you were supposed to pick up the kids. Imagine I'm talking to someone who forgot to pick up the kids. So I'm sort of complaining. So you should have picked up the kids. You were supposed to pick up the kids. So again, these two sentences would be equivalent, but this one, you would be using a passive sentence. So as you can see, there are very many uses to passive voices in English, so it's essential for you to know how to use